Welcome, everybody. We have a quick news update regarding the NIST lawsuit. We are submitting an amended complaint, and we're going to have a couple of guests on to talk about it. First, we have Ted Walter, our Director of Strategy and Development here at AE911Truth. He's also joined by Mick Harrison of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. Let's bring Ted and Mick on here. Gentlemen, welcome.
Hey, Andy, thanks.
Thank you, Eddie.
So I'm going to start with Ted now because basically you've been our contact guy for this for a lot of the time here. First, tell our audience, in case there's any newcomers, what this whole NIST lawsuit is all about, and then tell them about the amended complaint and why we are submitting it.
Sure. So about 2 years ago, in April of 2020, AE911Truth, together with many other requesters, about 88 architects and engineers, as well as 10 9/11 family members, submitted a request for correction to NIST under the Data Quality Act. And this came a few weeks after the release of the final report by Dr. Leroy Halsey at the University of Alaska Fairbanks on the collapse of World Trade Center Building 7. And what the request for correction was doing was, in part, taking the findings of the University of Alaska Fairbanks study and using those findings, as well as other evidence that had been developed over the years, to basically show to NIST that there were several areas in their final report on the collapse of Building 7 that violated the Data Quality Act, and specifically certain information quality standards that NIST itself issued under the Data Quality Act, that all the information that NIST disseminates needs to adhere to. And so we basically methodically went through the NIST report and identified 8 areas within the report, although there's many more, but we really focused on 8 that were the most compelling, where NIST violated its information quality standards. And essentially what we're talking about is that the information that NIST issued in that report was biased and incomplete. And a lot of it had to do with how according to NIST, the collapse of Building 7 initiates the initiating event that set off this big chain reaction that allegedly happened low down in the building on the 13th floor, and basically showing that entire scenario of how the collapse initiated and then progressed throughout the entire building is impossible. There were several things that NIST did in their analysis to enable that scenario to happen that were untrue, and things that simply couldn't happen, like a beam simply not being able to expand far enough to push this girder off of its seat and cause this collapse sequence. So we thought, as well as another area that's really important, is that NIST ignored a lot of evidence of explosions and incendiaries that were obviously, we believe, are responsible for bringing the building down. And so we submitted this about 2 years ago and went through this lengthy process with NIST over the last 2 years, trying to get them to correct their report, which would essentially mean going back and running new analyses, admitting that this one beam could not expand enough to push this girder off its seat, rerunning their modeling with this really important structural feature included that they left out intentionally, which, if that structural feature were included, it would prevent the initiating event as well. There's actually several things that if NIST had done it, modeled it correctly, the initiating event would have been impossible. So we were trying to get them to run their analysis with the correct inputs, with the correct information, and which would show that their initiating event it could never have happened. NIST eventually responded to that request for correction, and we were hoping for the best, but as largely anticipated, they denied the request, all 8 counts that were in the request. We appealed that a month later. This is about September of 2020. There was another supplement that we filed in December of 2020. And then it took NIST about 9 months to give us a final decision on the request, because there's an initial decision that they issued in the middle of 2020, and then a final decision that took till almost a year later in the middle of 2021. And basically the problem with NIST's responses, as we expect, is that they were totally unsubstantive, totally unresponsive. Really, there's an incredible amount of analysis and correct analysis in the request for correction that NIST basically they had to evade really talking about the issue, really doing the science and really explaining their side of the story and responding to our claims because their side is incorrect. And so what we ultimately did once we got their final decision, and it was more or less what we expected, it was even more cursory than the initial decision, was we decided that we needed to file a lawsuit because we believed that NIST was not complying with the Data Quality Act in how they dealt with our request for correction. And so that's where, so it brought us to where we are today. We filed that lawsuit in September of 2021, just before the 9/11 anniversary. And we finally got a response back from NIST in late December and trying to dismiss a motion to dismiss our case. And so what we've done yesterday was we filed an amended complaint. This is basically almost the same complaint that we filed back in September to initiate the lawsuit. But we, seeing what NIST was doing in its motion to dismiss to try to get our complaint dismissed, we made a few adjustments and some additions to the complaint to sort of buttress our case and make it when we actually respond to the motion to dismiss itself, the changes that we made to the initial complaint are going to be important for helping us respond and counter NIST motion to dismiss. And so this what we did yesterday is not like huge, it's not a huge development in the case, but it's an important step forward that enables us to, go forward and try to overcome NIST's motion to dismiss. And let me just clarify what we're really getting to here is we want to get past this motion to dismiss phase so that we can actually argue about the merits and hopefully get the court to order NIST to go back and comply with the requests that are in our request for correction for the court to force NIST to go back and run its analysis again.
Now, for our supporters out there who really like to dive deep and get into the nitty gritty, I know we aren't going to have time for that today for every detail, but just overall, what is being amended?
So Mick can also speak to this, but in simply one key thing was that NIST is trying to say that the various plaintiffs in this case don't have standing, and so we have architects and engineers for 9/11 as an organization as one plaintiff. We have a handful of 9/11 family members who are plaintiffs, and then we have 10 structural engineers and architects. And so one person from each group, and then Roland Angle, the CEO of AE as well, we filed declarations from each one of them to help us hopefully establish standing, that each of these groups of plaintiffs do have standing to bring this lawsuit. And then we made some other adjustments in the language of the complaint, which Mick can speak to better than me.
Absolutely. Well, let's bring Mick on here. Mick, you've been listening to Ted for the last couple of minutes talk about this. Add anything that you may feel he has left out, including the amendments. And from just me listening, I did not go to law school, but it seems like they're just trying to attack the ability to go into court because they don't really have any ground to stand on when it comes down to the scientific arguments. That's what I'm hearing, but I want to hear from you. So please enlighten our audience on your perspective.
Okay, so as Ted mentioned, the defendants, which is basically the government, NIST and the Department of Justice, want to dismiss the lawsuit, as you said, Andy, without getting to the merits, which are the scientific arguments about how NIST did not correctly decide architects and engineers' request for correction. So it is a preliminary challenge. If we win on this motion to dismiss, then we do get to the heart of the case, which has to do with the evidence and the logic and the science. And we are certainly hoping to get there on this important issue. So the government is trying to argue that all the petitioners lacked standing to bring the suit, legal eligibility to bring the suit. We filed the amended complaint to make more clear the standing of the petitioners, we added not only fact allegations on standing, but we added 3 declarations, which are the federal equivalent of affidavits. One from 9/11 family member Bob McIlvaine, a second from Roland Angle, the CEO of Architects and Engineers, and a third was engineer Ronald Brookman. And they've added considerable detail about their interest in the issue and why they should have standing to be a petitioner and a plaintiff. So we hope to have adequately strengthened by the amendment the complaint so that we can actually get past this preliminary motion and get to the merits, to the heart of the matter. I should add that NIST is arguing that for one of our counts, which is our count 9 of 10 counts, that we actually filed it too late. It's called a violation of the statute of limitations. And the reason they did that is because our lawsuit was filed more than 6 years after the alleged violation. There is a 6-year statute of limitations. So that count is not under the Administrative Procedures Act regarding the request for correction. It's regarding the National Construction Safety Team Act. And that act, as you may know, requires NIST to issue a public report that presents the likely technical cause of the building failure. In this case, talking about Building 7 of the World Trade Center. And our position is that it's 2-part. The determination by NIST that the Trade Center building came down because of fires alone and not because of explosives was not the likely technical cause. And in the request for correction, architects and engineers and the petitioners make a very strong, I would say, compelling and dispositive scientific case that NIST is no longer, if it ever was, in a position to say that the likely cause of the Trade Center 7 collapse was fire and not controlled demolition. And if you look at the report that NIST did on Building 7, which architects and engineers has critiqued so effectively, and if you look at the Halsey report as well, which sort of puts the nails in the coffin, there is no scientific basis for NIST determining that the likely cause of Building 7's collapse is fire and not explosives. NIST has never been in a position to conclude that. And the fact that they kept secret their computer modeling and are keeping it secret still today is sort of punctuation on that point, that if they were to make their modeling public and subject to independent scrutiny, the scientific community could make clear that NIST never had a basis, and NIST knew that they never had a basis to conclude that the likely technical cause of Building 7's collapse was fire. So what does that mean about count 9? Well, count 9 is simply saying that the statute was violated. They did issue a public report, but it wasn't on the likely cause of the building collapse. It was essentially a sham report where NIST knew that what they were presenting as the likely cause was not, in fact, the likely cause and could not have been. So that's the violation. Now, why is it still timely more than 6 years after the fact for us to raise this? And the answer is a legal concept called fraudulent concealment. And what we're saying is that because NIST kept its computer modeling secret and has still kept it secret, it wasn't really known with scientific certainty until the Halsey report that NIST could not have had a good faith basis for its conclusion that the likely technical cause of Building 7's collapse was fire. So we certainly filed this count within 6 years of the Halsey report and within 6 years of much of the dispositive evidence that's come forward. So under the doctrine called equitable tolling or equitable estoppel or both, the statute of limitations can be tolled, held in abeyance while the fraudulent concealment is taking place. And it's still taking place today, actually. We just happen to have found out by an expensive independent study through the University of Alaska report what the truth is. So that's count 9 in a nutshell. We also had a count 10, which has to do with procedural violation. NIST, in its request for correction procedures, properly requires, on paper at least, that the two-step decision process, one is deciding a citizen's request for correcting a report or other use of data or information, the second step being the appeal if they deny the first request, that those two steps are supposed to be independent of each other. So there shouldn't be one or more people involved in both steps. First step, normally done at the lower technical staff level, is to be reviewed by higher level folks with no connection between them. Our information indicates that there was a connection between the two steps in deciding the initial decision denying the request for correction and the later appeal decision upholding that denial, that there were higher level folks apparently in the Department of Commerce who were either involved in both steps or were superiors to those involved. So that is a procedural violation. And so I would probably stop there and say that those two counts, in addition to the 8 that Ted is talking about, comprise the amended complaint. And we've now set the stage to have the judge decide the standing question. We're going to see another motion to dismiss shortly from the government on the amended complaint. We'll then file a legal memo opposing that, and the judge will then decide that preliminary question.
Very interesting. We're certainly keeping track of it here at AE911Truth, and of course our supporters are as well. There was also a development, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks ago or so, where you were involved in oral arguments regarding the grand jury petition.
Right.
Just in a minute or so, can you give our supporters an update on that?
So that case was a case where Architects and Engineers is a co-plaintiff, along with 3 9/11 family members and 2 ground zero responders and Richard Gage, and I represent the plaintiffs there. We submitted, as you know, a detailed petition with the demolition evidence on the Trade Center to the U.S. Attorney in New York, Southern District, and to the special grand jury. The U.S. Attorney refused to deliver the petition and the evidence to the special grand jury, so we sued. The district court there denied on standing grounds, or dismissed on standing grounds. We appealed to the second highest court, federal court in the country, which is the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. The argument you mentioned was held, January 21st, which was 9 days ago. So I argued that case. We did it by Zoom before a 3-judge panel. There were a number of good questions from the panel about our right to have our case heard and our right to have our petition delivered. And we expect that important decision will be decided in a few months, if not sooner, by the Second Circuit. The case is important legally beyond the importance for 9/11. And that is because it may be the first Court of Appeals decision in the country to decide whether citizens, in fact, do these days still have a right to report federal crimes to a special grand jury or not. And even under the First Amendment, whether citizens have a right to petition a special grand jury as an entity of the government created by the Constitution. So it's a kind of a big issue. The government wants to let the U.S. Attorney and the DOJ decide what evidence a special grand jury gets to see or not, and therefore control basically decisions made by grand juries on whether there is probable cause to believe a crime was committed and whether a certain alleged perpetrator or potential defendant is to be indicted or not. If you put all that control of evidence in the hands of the U.S. Attorney, you're back to where we were before we had a grand jury. And folks, of course, don't remember because that was before we even had a Constitution. But The reason was the grand jury was created was to prevent political prosecutions, unjust, politically motivated prosecutions. It was a check and balance on the prosecutor. And now the prosecutor is essentially asking the court to take it back to the old days where it could, in fact, decide who gets prosecuted or not, which will essentially moot the grand jury's required constitutional role. So it's a big question.
It definitely is, and it's something that we are going to continue to follow here. It sounds like they're just slithering and squirming, trying to get out of these lawsuits without being able to take on the veracity of the evidence. So we're just going to have to keep on fighting it and following it. So, gentlemen, thank you for all the hard work that you are doing, and we'll be keeping an eye on all of your efforts moving forward. All right, so we're going to keep you updated on every development regarding this lawsuit against NIST. If you're not signed up for our emails, you can do so at AE911Truth.org. Getting those emails, you can find out about all of the great efforts that we're doing here at this organization and pursuing justice for the 9/11 families and for the victims, of course, on that day. And I want to thank all the people who have donated to this lawsuit. This couldn't be happening without you. So for my part, I just want to say this is Andy Steele, and have a great day.